Ever since we covered the best moms in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, we knew the dads would get a turn too. So do the JoJo's dads mirror the parenting skills we saw in Part 5, or do they have the undying love of Holly Cujo? Let's see how they stack up against one another, good, evil, or neutral. The only restriction is I won't be discussing dads from Part 8 since that full part has not been completed in manga form at the time of this video's recording. Otherwise, we all know Norisuke would be the true number one, and to add a good parental eye to this list, just like in the mom video, my own mom will be co-hosting with me once again.
Hi everyone, I'm happy to be back to discuss the dads of JoJo's.
Now, let's break down the top 10 dads in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Number 10, Diavolo. Both the bottom of this list and the mom list have a parent from Part 5, further exemplifying that Part 5 is the worst place to learn any parenting skills from, unless we're talking about Bucciarati to completely tip the scale the other way. Though, comparing the number 10 on the mom list, Giorno's mother, to Diavolo, I think we finally found a worse parent than Giorno's unnamed mother, solely because she did not try to intentionally kill her child, and both of Giorno's hands were intact when he lived with her. Can't say the same for Diavolo, whose only emotion is murder, and he stealthily took Trish from Bucciarati by leaving her hand in his hand and taking the rest of her. Unless Diavolo was so excited to see his daughter that he ripped her out of Bucciarati's grasp so quickly that the force left her hand in... who am I kidding? He just wanted to murder her.
I'd say he has a heart made out of stone, but I actually think he doesn't have a heart at all, the way he treats his daughter and anyone who disobeys him.
But did he have a good reason? Once again, no. Trish has a spiritual connection with him, allowing her to know wherever he is, which does not mesh well with his secret mafia boss persona, so if he was with her for an extended period of time, he would likely not be very caring towards her. The only thing he has going for him is that the pursuit of his daughter created a great plot and wouldn't have brought Team Bucciarati as close together as they were. King Crimson was cool too, though not even the power of King Crimson can move him higher on this list, unless he erases the entries that are ahead of him until he's the only entry left. Another thing, I like when he was using the computer as King Crimson and the keyboard was much smaller than him. It's a keyboard and it's tiny. Number 9, the Nijimura's dad. It's difficult to place Okuyasu's dad on this list. We meet him when he's a shell of his former self as a shapeless dude who can't talk with an "I'm not crying, you're crying" moment, but he did have a past with some shades of gray. He initially was raising Keicho and Okuyasu in a loving family, but when his wife passed away, he had trouble coping. The problem with that is he took it out on his children, which ultimately lowers his good dad stock that he built up prior to his wife's death. His next pursuit was working for Dio to keep their economic situation intact, which you could say had some noble intentions since he had 2 kids to support, but at the same time, he seemed to enjoy the wealth from a selfish perspective too. However, this personality change could also have been from the flesh bud that Dio stuck in him to make sure he obeys, so maybe he's not fully to blame. To flip it over once again though, the dad still seemed to be abusive during all of this, so it was a horrifying situation for the kids regardless. I guess it doesn't matter now since his body is decaying from the flesh bud, but I still find it hard to put all the responsibility on Dio for this.
Maybe he's not just a pile of rotting flesh, he's rotten to the core.
I can't help but feel bad knowing how this started and possibly how it could have been avoided. It also helps you sympathize with the dad that Keicho just kicks him around when he's simply trying to remember his family at this point. And then just when we think we're going to make a breakthrough, Keicho gets killed, so it's a no-win scenario here.
Like father, like son when Keicho beat his dad. It's what he was taught his whole childhood, but neither one deserved that fate.
In the end, we can take solace in the fact that the life scenario is much better for Okuyasu now, and he takes care of his dad better than his brother did. I thank Josuke for teaching Okuyasu to be so wholesome. That ending scene of the Nijimuras at Tonio's is very sweet. Number 8, Yoshihiro Kira. Yoshihiro, father of the serial killer Yoshikage Kira, is another Enya scenario, where we see him do a bunch of malicious things on screen, such as attempted murder, manipulating others, and most notably, helping cover up his son's murder so his son can collect more hands. But on paper, you could just say he's a dad helping his son pursue his own independent hobbies, and you gotta respect a dad who supports his kid. Honestly, they seem to get along just fine. Yoshikage wants to stay in the shadows so he can keep getting away with what he's doing, but he still has normal conversations with his dad comfortably. Well, as normal as they can get when you're giving advice on the do's and don'ts of murder. And they do all this when the dad is just a ghost who lives in a picture. But casually being a ghost is actually pretty normal in the JoJo's universe, so maybe I don't have to give them any credit there. Since everything he does is in support of his son, I wonder if Yoshihiro would have taken a more modest path in life, or I guess death, if his son just took up a normal hobby instead. I'm not actually sure how different Yoshihiro would be, since he seems to be pretty good at attempted murder when left alone, with the help of his camera and afterlife magic. If a picture gets snapped by his camera and you're in the frame, he can do whatever he wants to you in the photograph and it gets bounced back to you in real life.
He's got some cool tricks. Too bad he's using them to protect evil. He'd make a good magician. Watch out, Houdini.
And for my next trick, I'll remove these guys' heads with this knife.
Remove all sharp objects before taking any more pictures.
His defeat was actually pretty easy. Just take a picture of the photo that he's in with his own camera, and he's stuck there for good, and now you can interrogate him about his son.
Taking a picture of a picture? That's an ingenious trap. It's like looking in the mirror of your doom.
But he can still use it to his benefit. He's as light as a piece of paper, so he can ride the wind, along with just taking advantage of the main character's naivete with his secret power of lying.
They should have scanned the picture into the computer and destroyed the original. His kryptonite, a paper shredder, or a sharp pair of scissors.
It was the late 90s at this point in the story, when scanners were not as advanced as they are now, so he may have gotten too pixelated and muffled in the transfer. Number 7, Cars. You know what? I really like Cars. There's something about him that makes him one of my favorite villains despite his generic sounding plan. Even though it's just the ultimate power motivation, I like his little quirks when he breaks his serious demeanor, such as when he takes a second to just laugh maniacally before going back to default, or randomly deciding to save a dog from a drunk driver. Why did he do that? That is so endearing that he would just save a dog on impulse. That's like negative evil points in JoJo's. And of course, you have his powers, which is just doing whatever he wants to. Mostly bone blades, but I also like that he can just blend his body into various animal-themed things.
He's still better than a Ginzu knife, and the NutriBullet Pro that I just bought. Smoothies, anyone?
But the reason he's here is that I consider Cars to be in the father category. We learn in his backstory that after he slaughtered everyone in his village for not siding with his grand plan of ultimate power and preventing their people from being wiped out by the sun, him and the other Pillar Man AC/DC took 2 infants and raised them to be strong warriors for his main plot. We don't really know what the parenting skills were like of Cars, or AC/DC for that matter, but considering Wamu became an honorable fighter, more so than Cars had to have done something right, and we don't talk about Santana. Even though Wamu referred to Cars and AC/DC as masters, I feel the way Cars interacts with Wamu and the fact that he took him in shows a level of nurturing. It's like a stern father's relationship with his son. He even lets Wamu do his own thing when they're competing for the Red Stone of Asia against Joseph and Lisa. It's clear Cars wants to win nice and quick, but when Wamu's like, "Dad, I want to fight the strong man in the Coliseum," Cars is like, "Okay, let me just fight the other one. And I want to have a chariot race." Fine, I'll buy the weapons. He honored Wamu's desire for honor, and just kept the dirty tricks for his turn, and that seriously was a lame cheap shot against Lisa. The chariot race was a much better idea.
In Cars' quest for winning and power, it's amazing that Wamu is as honorable as he is. I guess he's not as influential as he thinks.
I feel like Cars just let Wamu do his own thing if he didn't find it destructive to the legacy of the Pillar Men. Cars even defended Wamu's honor when their minions were making fun of his loss and death by killing those disposable vampires. All in all, Cars may be a lousy son for killing his own parents, but he seems to be an alright dad. Number 6, George Joestar from Part 7. George was a strict father, like his Part 1 counterpart, but he was a bit too strict for his own good. Well, maybe more than a bit. Yes, he wanted his sons to become successful horse racers, specifically his older son Nicholas, but in doing this, he wasn't particularly fatherly towards Johnny. Nicholas got off the hook since he was a racing prodigy, but after his death and Johnny breaking his spine, George basically abandoned his only living son.
His fiery passion clouded his emotions. He's so determined to have a world-class racing son, he thought of his children as achievements rather than as family.
And it's hard to excuse how George wanted Johnny's secret pet mouse drowned when he discovered it. Like, come on, man, just let him release it in the woods, which Johnny actually did behind his father's back, so good thinking.
Huh? I don't like mice, but still drowning your child's pet? Definitely not listed in the book of parenting skills.
The silver lining in all this is many years later, George finally reconciles with Johnny, showing some sort of off-screen character growth. Perhaps the grief from Nicholas's death made him act worse when Johnny was young, or maybe it was just Johnny's recent racing success at the time. But either way, it was nice to see George finally having a "that's my boy" moment, even if it was a decade or so later than it should have been. Number 5. Mario Zeppeli. Here's a dad that gets forgotten a lot. Mario is the father of Part 2's Joe-Bro, Caesar Zeppeli, and we only see him in the one Caesar childhood flashback that we get, but he made an impact, at least to me. He was your standard family man who loved his kids, but one day, he realized the world was going to be in danger and had to investigate this impending threat, which ended up being the Part 2 antagonists, the Pillar Men. He wasn't chasing after them for clout or a good fight, it was because he knew his family would be in danger. This wasn't a random Deus Ex Machina vision either, it's tied to Part 1. He knew the fate of his father, Will Zeppeli, who he never got to know, but what he did know is the stone mask was the catalyst for it all. Dedicating his life to learning about the mask, he found out that the Pillar Men would be awakened someday, and he thought he could stop them beforehand. This, of course, made Caesar think his dad just left the family like that, so he held a grudge. That is, until their fateful meeting at the Pillar Men stone tablets. When Caesar was about to touch one of the stones out of intrigue and get absorbed, Mario just happened to be investigating the area and pushed his son out of the way, sacrificing himself. Mario didn't even recognize his own son at the time, either because he was now grown up, or because he was on his journey for so long that his memories were clouded. Even though Mario just thought he was helping a stranger, Caesar viewed this as Mario explaining his absence and making up for it with one lethal action, and it was a nice moment for a character we were just learning about. This inspired Caesar to continue what his father was doing and train harder with Hamon and Razor Bubbles. I'm not sure what inspired him to use those, but they're cool.
Definitely not a child's toy, unless you want to wind up in the emergency room.
One other thing to note is when we first meet Will Zeppeli in Part 1, in the original run of the manga, he mentioned at one point that he had no family, but once Araki realized that he wanted more Zeppelis in the story, the line was changed to him saying that he had no known family in re-releases. I'm not sure if Will seriously didn't know about Mario, or if it was a similar scenario to Mario with Caesar, where he forgot his family, or just lied because he abandoned them for a greater mission to protect them. I know the Zeppeli family tree is seemingly cursed regardless, but it makes you wonder if it was just a coincidence how Mario and Will died, or if it's some sort of destiny in the Zeppeli bloodline if you have kids. Number 4. Jotaro. Jotaro on paper doesn't have the best track record as a dad, but it's hard to call him a mediocre father, simply because we know him so well. I think it's mostly because he built up a lot of good boy points from us seeing his adventures in the Middle East and in Morio, so we know he wouldn't just abandon his family like other characters, right? Well, he's always been the stoic type that hates to show emotion, so that fits him. If he wants to study dolphins, then he can study dolphins, just so long as he tells his daughter that he loves her, which he did, once. He actually did a lot more for his daughter, but since Part part 6 is the part that's about to be anime at the time of this video's recording, I'll keep the major spoilers a secret. Let's just say, if he was more present for Jolene's childhood, it probably would have helped raise his parenting rank, but I think he more than makes up for it. I also like that his outfit found ways to stay the same, yet innovate itself greatly with each appearance by him in each part.
I think he has a bigger wardrobe than I do with all his outfit changes, but always the trademark trench coat and cap. Maybe he can design a line of outerwear for Burberry when he's done fighting evil.
Number 3. George Joestar from Part 1, the original Joestar. He's a strict father, but it's clear he does it out of love instead of for his own self-satisfaction. He's just by the book in how to be a proper gentleman, so he's trying to squash any bad behavior by Jonathan. He still seems to give his son freedom to pursue his own interests. It's just his attitude that he's trying to control. Though taking away dinner early was harsh. Don't let the food go to waste. And really, a lot of George's seemingly bad parenting was from his gullibility. When Dario was trying to rob his corpse when he thought George was dead, George interpreted that as Dario trying to save his life. When he adopted Dio after Dario's death, George didn't notice Dio doing anything malicious against his son Jonathan, or for the next 7 years after that. And George didn't notice Dio trying to poison him.
He's honorable for taking Dio in, yet oblivious and failing to recognize the evil that he was inviting into his manor, until it was too late.
It's a wonder how he still has his fortune with how often he gets tricked. It's kind of endearing that he's this fine gentleman, but he's susceptible to pretty basic deceit. I mean, it would be better if it didn't lead to his death.
In this case, not better late than never.
Even though we don't see the best from George in the highlights from Jonathan's childhood, he's a good dad off screen. You can see it in how well Jonathan turned out, and even in how Jonathan was able to use George's lesson on how to get a toy back from the dog in a much more intense fight. That's an underrated moment. Also, George sacrificing himself to defend his son. That's a good indicator too. Number 2. Paolo Bucciarati. Finally, we have a Part 5 dad that's a good parent without any strings attached. I don't have to stretch to make him sound better than he actually is. He didn't start good and then just drop off. He was a great dad from when we met him to his unfortunate death. And there's nothing too dramatic about his methods. He's just a humble man who wanted to live an honest life with his son. Paolo and his wife gave Bruno a loving childhood together until their unexpected divorce. Bruno chose to live with his dad afterwards since he felt his dad needed more support post-divorce. I'm not going to accuse his mom of not loving her son as much as his dad did, but she did stop visiting them as much after meeting a new man in the city, so Bruno made a wise choice picking his dad to live with. While his life was dedicated to his family before, Paolo was motivated now more than ever to send his son to a good school and make as much money as he needed to support that dream, even though it meant doing more than just his normal job of fishing. He worked significantly longer, and he rented his boat out to tourists, which unfortunately led to his demise. He worked so hard, but one run-in with two guys doing a drug deal that thought he saw too much threw all that down the drain to make him the most tragic character on this list.
Talk about working yourself to death. What a shame.
While he survived the attack initially, it ultimately led to his death a few years later. I wish it could have had a happier ending or a silver lining, but we can at least take solace in the fact that he was such a good dad that we feel the sadness that we should. I guess we could also credit him as an influence to Bruno, who was undoubtedly one of the best mentors in the series. Bruno had to have learned how to be a role model somewhere, and I think it all started with those fishing trips with his dad. Paolo may have only had a small part in the story, but he is one of the kindest and most honest dads in the series. Honorable mentions: Johnny Joestar. He's a character from Part 7, but he wasn't seen as a dad until Part 8, so I'm not sure if he goes against my no Part 8 dads restriction from the intro. I'll just keep him here just in case, but he's a much better dad than most of the other dads on this list, no question. sons. The priest that raised Diavolo. This could have turned out so much better if Diavolo wasn't destined to be evil. Straits, even though we barely knew anything about him in part 1, in part 2 we only saw him become obsessed with looking younger and turning evil, I assume he was a fine dad. Lisa turned out well, but she was pretty indifferent when she brought him up in conversation post-vampire, so maybe he wasn't the greatest. And Speedwagon. He may have been a lifelong bachelor, but he helped Irina raise George Joestar II and Joseph, along with having a part in Caesar's life. Speedwagon may have not officially been called dad, but I think he was just as influential as one. Number 1 is the obvious choice, but sometimes that's the best one. It's Joseph Joestar. It's almost unfair to match up Joseph against all these other dads, since we've seen him for the longest time. He had a good amount of screen time as a son, grandfather, best friend, mentor, and most importantly for this list, father, and in 3 different ways. His most notable dad time is of course in part 3, where we see him with Holly. While we didn't see her grow up with Joseph, we could tell she has a good relationship with her dad when they meet up to discuss Jotaro. They both are happy to see each other, and Holly's a good egg. Even when Joseph wants her to stop doing something, like using her Japanese nickname over her birth name when living in Japan, his parental side holds him back since he knows he has to let his kid live her own life. I think Joseph's fatherly nature could be summed up with the scene of how he treated Holly after she passed out when her stand emerged. Show this to anyone if you want a good rundown of why Joseph's a good dad to Holly.
Irina obviously did something right when she raised Joseph. Just look at how he dotes on Holly after her brush with death from the stand. He may protest loudly, but if Holly asks him to do something, the answer will always be yes.
It's also important to note that Holly was the main motivation for Joseph to kill Dio so she would be rid of the stand that was killing her. Before that, they still wanted to kill Dio greatly, but it went from, we'll get him eventually, to, we're gonna go to Egypt right now to kill that son of a Dario. No one harms my daughter, showing how much Joseph cares for Holly to jumpstart such an adventure. That being said, Joseph has one other biological son, and it initially hit his wholesome family man persona. We learned that he cheated on his wife with Tomoko about 17 years prior, and she had a son, the 4th JoJo Josuke, and he did not know about him for about 15 years. While that's not good husband activity, he honestly was unaware of Josuke, so he was not trying to be an absent father. His main limitation for not visiting him right away after learning about him is he was not fit to travel at the age of 79. However, when he did meet Josuke, despite some of his physical and mental limitations, he tried to give Josuke the respect he deserved, showing he still has that fatherly heart. He tried to approach the situation gently, knowing that Josuke may be bitter that his father appeared to have waited until now to seek him out. It was awkward at first, but they just had to bond with an invisible baby and all was better. It also helps that Josuke was as wholesome as Holly is to make the interaction less troublesome than it could have been.
Joseph may not have been around to raise him, but you can tell Josuke has Joestar blood coursing through him, since he's a stand-up guy like his father, prior to the affair, that is.
And let's not forget that Joseph had a third kid, the one he adopted, Shizuka, the invisible baby. If you want some evidence that Joseph would have accepted Josuke immediately if he knew sooner, look at how quickly he takes in Shizuka once he learns that she has no parents. That baby was glued to him for the rest of part 4. It may have even saved his marriage, since Susie was in love with the new child that they get to raise according to exposition. It does open up the question of, did he just take a child home without confirming that she had no parents? I like the fan theory that her mom was killed by Kira, so the baby was orphaned, but I don't think we ever got confirmation of anything. As for Joseph's powers, well, they don't factor into his parenting, but who doesn't love the fun vines that are hermit purple?
Can you plant them? Will they grow?
No, they just kind of manifest from his arm.
Ugh, I wouldn't want that, though I do like the color purple.
So with years of parenting under his belt and the way he accepted new kids into his life at his advanced age, Joseph Joestar crusades his way to the top of this list. Now, what did you think? Did you like all these dads? Who's worthy of a Father of the Year award, and who's just gonna get a plaque that says Worst Father on it? Let us know in the comments. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and we will see you in the next video.